August 1944, an American ultimatum reached a German commander dug into the fortress of St. Malo. The message was simple: surrender now or be destroyed. The German response was not cautious. It was theatrical. Every house will be a fortress, every stone a hiding place. For every stone we will fight. It was the kind of answer meant to sound heroic, defiant. When the message reached General George S. Patton, he did not argue. He did not negotiate. He did not reply at all. What Patton did next turned defiance into catastrophe and ensured no second ultimatum would ever be taken lightly again. Understanding why Beckerer felt confident enough to mock an American surrender demand requires understanding the strategic situation in August 1944 and what German commanders had learned about American tactics. The St. Malo fortress complex wasn't some improvised defensive position. It was part of the Atlantic Wall, centuries-old fortifications that the Germans had spent years reinforcing. Concrete bunkers with walls 20 feet thick, underground command posts with running water and air conditioning, artillery positions carved into granite quarries, pillboxes covering every approach. Beckerer commanded the remaining forces of the 77th Infantry Division, experienced troops who'd fought and survived the Normandy campaign. They knew how to defend fortified positions. They'd watched American forces struggle at other Atlantic Wall fortresses. They'd seen how costly urban combat became when defenders were determined. More importantly, German commanders had developed a specific understanding of American operational patterns. Americans brought overwhelming firepower, yes, but they were also cautious about casualties. They prepared extensively before major assaults. They relied on artillery and air support to minimize infantry losses. This caution created predictability. When Americans issued surrender ultimatums, German commanders had learned they often had days or even weeks to prepare before the actual assault came. Time to strengthen positions. Time to coordinate with other garrisons. Time for relief forces to organize. Beckerer had seen this pattern at other fortress positions across Brittany. American forces would surround a position, demand surrender, then spend days preparing elaborate assault operations. He calculated that dramatic defiance would buy time, that his statement about fighting for every stone would force the Americans into a prolonged siege. The longer he held, the more likely higher command could organize relief or reinforcement. What Beckerer didn't understand, what German intelligence had failed to properly assess, was that Patton didn't follow standard American operational patterns. Before we continue, if you value historically grounded military storytelling that goes beyond surface-level narratives, subscribe now. This channel breaks down decisions, not just battles. When the U.S. commander issued the surrender demand to Beckerer on August 12, it wasn't just a formality. American doctrine emphasized offering surrender before assault, to minimize casualties on both sides, and to encourage other German garrisons to capitulate without fighting. The terms were standard: immediate surrender. Prisoners would be treated according to Geneva Convention. Officers could keep their sidearms. Wounded would receive medical care. All personnel would survive the war. The alternative? Assault by overwhelming force. Beckerer didn't just refuse. He made his refusal theatrical. His response: every house must become a fortress, every stone a hiding place, and for every stone we shall fight, was carefully phrased. It was meant to convey absolute determination, to signal that taking Dinard would cost the Americans dearly, to demonstrate that German forces hadn't lost their will to fight. It was also meant to be reported back to American high command. Beckerer understood psychological warfare. He wanted Patton and his staff to believe that assaulting Dinard would require extensive preparation and would result in significant American casualties. In his underground command post, surrounded by his veteran officers, Beckerer probably felt he'd made the correct decision. His troops were well positioned. His fortifications were strong. His defiant response would buy the time needed to make American commanders think twice about a hasty assault. He had no way of knowing that his theatrical defiance had just guaranteed the opposite would happen. What stands out about Backer's response isn't the refusal itself. German commanders refused surrender demands all the time. It was the tone, the deliberate dramatics, the challenge embedded in the language. "For every stone we shall fight" wasn't just military determination. It was a taunt. It was Backer telling the Americans that they'd pay in blood for every yard of ground, that their superiority in firepower wouldn't overcome German will and fortification. When the American delegation returned and reported Backer's statement, the reaction among Macon's staff was mixed. Some officers saw it as confirmation that assaulting Dinard would be costly and suggested increasing artillery preparation time. Others recognized it as psychological posturing designed to delay the assault. The report went up the chain of command. Macon informed 8th Corps. 8th Corps informed 3rd Army Headquarters. Patton's response, according to multiple witnesses, was immediate and cold. "Then we'll bury him under every stone." This wasn't anger. It wasn't personal offense at being challenged. It was calculation. Patton had seen this pattern before. German commanders who believed dramatic defiance would make Americans hesitate. He'd learned that the opposite approach worked better. When an enemy commander publicly committed to fighting to the last, you gave them exactly what they demanded, quickly, overwhelmingly. So thoroughly that every other German garrison heard about it and reconsidered their own defiant statements. What I find most significant about this moment is how Backer's confidence was built on accurate information that led to catastrophically wrong conclusions. He was correct that American forces were typically cautious. He was correct that fortified positions usually required extensive preparation to assault. He was correct that Americans tried to minimize their own casualties. What he didn't understand was that Patton would sacrifice all of those typical advantages to make an example out of commanders who mocked American ultimatums. Patton didn't send a second ultimatum. He didn't extend the deadline. He didn't offer better terms. He didn't waste time trying to convince Backer that surrender was the rational choice. Instead, he ordered immediate escalation. Within hours of receiving Becher's defiant response, Patton had redirected the 331st Infantry Regiment to reinforce the assault on Dinard. 2 full regiments would now attack a position that 1 regiment had been struggling against. More importantly, he changed the tactical approach. Initially, American forces had been conducting careful, methodical attacks isolating individual pillboxes, reducing strongpoints one at a time, minimizing casualties. Patton's new orders, overwhelming pressure on multiple axes, simultaneously, don't give the Germans time to shift reserves or coordinate responses. Attack continuously, day and night, until German command structure collapsed. He also accelerated artillery support. Corps artillery battalions that had been supporting other operations were redirected to Dinard. The goal wasn't just suppression fire, it was systematic destruction of German command and control infrastructure. Here's where Patton's understanding of psychology becomes visible. He wasn't trying to kill every German soldier in Dinard. He was trying to break Becher's ability to command and his troops' will to follow orders. The assault that resumed on August 13 was fundamentally different from what had come before. Instead of careful advances, American forces attacked from multiple directions simultaneously. German positions that had held for days were suddenly under pressure from 3 or 4 directions at once. Becher's carefully coordinated defensive plan started breaking down. Units couldn't communicate effectively. Reserves couldn't be moved to threatened sectors because every sector was threatened. The underground command post that had seemed so secure became a trap. Becher could receive reports of American advances, but couldn't see the battlefield or coordinate effective responses. By August 14, American forces were inside Dinard itself, not just at the outskirts in the streets. The methodical reduction of pillboxes continued, but now those pillboxes were isolated, cut off from supporting positions, taking fire from multiple directions. What surprised me most while researching this battle was discovering how quickly the German defense collapsed once American forces committed to overwhelming pressure. On August 11, before Backerer's defiant response, American attacks had made minimal progress despite full-day efforts. On August 13 to 14, after Patton ordered escalation, American forces broke through in multiple locations and entered the town. The difference wasn't better tactics or more firepower. It was tempo. Patton had eliminated the pauses that allowed German defenders to recover and reorganize. Backerer had expected time. He'd counted on American caution giving him days to coordinate defense. Instead, he got less than 48 hours before his entire defensive system came apart. By the morning of August 15, Becherer's situation had moved from difficult to hopeless, and his command was beginning to fracture. The phone call that morning reveals how completely the situation had deteriorated. When Macon called Backerer's underground command post, the fact that American forces had captured enough territory to connect phone lines to German positions shows how thoroughly the defenses had been penetrated. Backerer was stunned into silence. Macon's message was direct. "We are already inside your strong points. I am inviting you to surrender." Backerer's response showed a commander who'd realized his defiant rhetoric had accomplished nothing. "I see no cause for surrender, but I would request you to take over my wounded, who are no longer capable of fighting." This wasn't the confident defiance of 3 days earlier. This was a commander negotiating for humanitarian relief while still maintaining the fiction that he could continue fighting. Macon agreed to a 1-hour ceasefire to evacuate German wounded. American ambulances drove into German positions, loaded casualties, and withdrew. For exactly 1 hour, the fighting stopped. Then it resumed with even greater intensity. What I find most significant about this moment is what it reveals about the psychological dimension of the collapse. Becherer hadn't run out of ammunition. His fortifications hadn't been physically destroyed. His troops hadn't been killed or captured in overwhelming numbers. But his ability to command effectively had been shattered. The tempo of American attacks had overwhelmed German communication systems. Units were making independent decisions to surrender or retreat without orders. The coordinated defense that depended on Backerer's central command had dissolved into isolated pockets fighting separate battles. By afternoon of August 15, American forces were using white phosphorus shells. When these hit the German ammunition dump, the resulting fire and smoke made the underground positions uninhabitable. Troops couldn't breathe. Communications failed completely. Medical facilities were overwhelmed. Backerer ordered a white flag raised, not because his position had been overrun, but because he'd lost the ability to command. His dramatic pledge to fight for every stone ended with his forces surrendering while many positions were still physically intact and defensible. 350 survivors emerged from the underground complex. Not the thousands Backerer had commanded just days earlier. Most had already surrendered or been captured in isolated positions across Dinard. The total German casualties at Dinard, approximately 4,000 captured, including Becherer himself. American casualties, significant, but far fewer than if Becherer's defiant pledge had resulted in the house-to-house fighting he'd threatened. The fall of Dinard on August 15 accomplished exactly what Patton had intended. It sent a message to every other German garrison in Brittany about what happened when commanders mocked American ultimatums. Becherer's confident prediction that Americans would have to fight for every stone had lasted less than 3 days. His carefully prepared defensive positions had been overrun not because American firepower was overwhelming, though it was substantial, but because American operational tempo had prevented effective coordination. The strategic consequences extended beyond just Dinard. The broader St. Malo fortress complex, which included multiple separate German defensive positions, began surrendering more readily after Becherer's rapid defeat. German commanders at other fortified positions in Brittany-Brest, Lorient, Saint-Nazaire received detailed reports about what had happened at Dinard. The message was clear: Dramatic defiance didn't buy time or deter American assault. It guaranteed intensified attack with minimal pause. What stands out here is the contrast between Backer's expectations and reality. He'd calculated that his defiant response would force Americans into a prolonged siege, buying time for higher command to organize relief or reinforcement. Instead, his defiance had triggered exactly the opposite, an accelerated assault that gave German forces no time to adjust. The broader impact on German morale in the Atlantic Wall fortresses was significant. When commanders learned that Becherer's supposedly impregnable position had fallen in 3 days despite his dramatic pledge, it undermined confidence that any defensive position could hold against determined American attack. This psychological effect was precisely what Patton had intended. He didn't just want to capture Dinard. He wanted every German garrison commander in Brittany to understand that surrendering on first demand was preferable to dramatic resistance that would be crushed anyway. The casualty comparison tells the story. If Bacherer had accepted the initial surrender terms, all 4,000-plus German troops in Dinard would have survived unharmed and spent the rest of the war in POW camps. Instead, hundreds died or were wounded in the 3-day battle. American casualties would have been 0 with peaceful surrender. Instead, the assault cost significant American lives. Both sides paid a price for Bacherer's dramatic defiance. The difference is that the Americans achieved their objective on their timeline, while the Germans got nothing except casualties for their commander's theatrical statement. Why this moment defined Patton's command style. The Dinard assault exemplifies a core principle of Patton's command philosophy that German intelligence consistently failed to grasp. Never allow the enemy time to recover psychologically. Most American commanders, most Allied commanders, generally followed a pattern of deliberate preparation before major assaults. Artillery preparation measured in hours or days. Infantry positions carefully established. Supply lines secured. Reserves positioned. All of this took time, which gave defenders time to prepare, adjust, and steel themselves mentally for the coming assault. Patton inverted this pattern. Once he decided to attack, the assault began as quickly as forces could be positioned. The preparation wasn't about perfecting the plan. It was about eliminating the delay between decision and execution. This approach had a specific psychological effect on defenders. They didn't get the time to mentally prepare for the assault. They didn't have days to convince themselves their position was strong. They couldn't develop the false confidence that comes from watching enemies prepare extensively, which suggests the assault will be difficult. Instead, they faced immediate, overwhelming pressure that prevented coherent response. What I find most significant about Patton's handling of Bacherer's defiance is how it demonstrates the difference between tactical brilliance and operational effectiveness. The assault on Dinard wasn't tactically sophisticated. It was straightforward. Attack from multiple directions with overwhelming force until the defense collapses. But operationally, it was devastating. By eliminating the pause between ultimatum and assault, Patton prevented German forces from using the time to strengthen positions, coordinate with other garrisons, or request reinforcements. More importantly, he established a pattern that shaped German command decisions throughout the Brittany campaign. After Dinard, when American forces issued surrender ultimatums to other fortresses, German commanders had to consider, do we surrender now and guarantee survival, or do we resist and risk being destroyed in 48 to 72 hours like Becherer? This explains why Third Army advanced so rapidly across France in August-September 1944. It wasn't just that American forces were faster or better equipped. It was that Patton had systematically destroyed German confidence that resistance would buy meaningful time. The principle extends beyond just Patton's operations. Modern military doctrine emphasizes tempo and momentum, precisely because commanders learned from World War II that defensive positions are most vulnerable immediately after being established. before defenders can adjust to the psychological reality of their situation. Looking back at Bakkerer's dramatic pledge to fight for every stone, the question isn't whether he was brave or whether his troops were capable. German forces at Dinard fought as well as could be expected given their situation. The question is whether his theatrical defiance accomplished anything except guaranteeing what he'd hoped to prevent. If Bakkerer had accepted the initial surrender terms on August 12, his troops would have survived. The Americans would have taken Dinard without firing a shot. Bakkerer himself would have spent the rest of the war in a POW camp and gone home to Germany afterward. Instead, his confident mockery triggered an intensified assault that cost hundreds of German lives, resulted in his own capture under humiliating circumstances, and established a precedent that undermined German defensive operations across Brittany. The long-term impact of this incident extends beyond just one battle. It exemplifies a fundamental principle about military command. Dramatic gestures don't change strategic realities. Bakkerer's position was hopeless, regardless of what he said in response to the ultimatum. His defiant statement didn't make his fortifications stronger or American firepower weaker. It just changed how quickly and intensely the assault came. Patton understood this. He knew that psychological warfare worked both ways. Bakkerer thought his defiant statement would intimidate Americans into cautious assault. Patton used that same defiance to justify overwhelming attack that served as intimidation to every other German garrison. This was not the last time a German commander underestimated Patton, and the next one paid an even higher price. At Brest, Colonel Hermann Bernhard Ramke would make similar theatrical pledges about fighting to the last man. He would learn, as Bakkerer did, that Patton took such statements literally and responded accordingly. The pattern established at Dinard, dramatic German defiance, followed by rapid American assault, would repeat across the European theater. Each time, German commanders discovered that their theatrical gestures accomplished nothing except ensuring the fight they claimed to welcome came faster and harder than they'd expected. Do you think Bakkerer's defiance was justified military determination or reckless posturing that got his men killed for no strategic gain? Should military commanders make dramatic pledges they can't fulfill, or is honesty about hopeless situations more honorable? Drop your thoughts in the comments. And if you want more stories about the consequences of dramatic military gestures and how commanders respond when challenged, subscribe now. Because military history is full of moments where theatrical defiance met cold calculation.